So when we're coming with agendas to our bosses, the more we can add interest to those agendas, the more we can add extra stimulus to those agendas, the better it will help them focus. So one of the best ways to do that is color code them and use something what I call a stoplight chart. Stoplight chart is a kind of a common project management tool. It's when essentially you take all the items that are occurring, you treat those as kind of rows on your sheet, and then next to each row, you color code it. And you put a green light and green color next to the ones that are on track, yellow next to the ones that we need to pay attention to, and then red next to the ones that are off track, that are emergencies that require a lot of conversation. This is the Workplace Therapist Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And the entire purpose of the show is one singular thing, and that's to help you have better conversations and healthier relationships at work. So this is one of our workplace therapist shows focusing specifically on leadership therapy. And if you're not familiar with this format, this is when I take on a question or challenge that you all have brought to me, either as a listener or as a reader or as a client, and I take it on for our show. And so today I'm going to take on a topic that has been particularly consistent from a couple different angles in the last year. And that is, how do I more effectively manage my boss when they've got some pretty heavy tendencies that are ADD? If you're not familiar with ADD, that's attention deficit disorder. So we're going to take that on. That's going to be part one, is we're going to talk about how do we more effectively manage a boss that's got ADD. But I'm also going to take on part two of that same very question, because when I spent some time on answering that question at the end of last year in a blog post that I wrote, I had many readers come back to me and say, hey, Brandon, I totally get the importance of managing a boss more effectively that way. But doesn't the boss have some responsibility in this? I mean, we're not trying to create a codependent relationship, are we? And absolutely not. They're exactly right. So we're going to spend the second part of our conversation today on how do you more effectively manage yourself if you've got ADD tendencies, because it can be a really powerful thing for your team, because leaders with ADD bring a lot of ideas and generate a lot of ideas, but it can be a really anxiety-producing train ride if we don't manage it well. So part one is going to be how do we manage a boss? Part two is how we're going to manage ourselves. So let's dive first into part one. Okay, how do we manage our boss? So I think the first initial question we have to ask ourselves is, well, how do I even know if my boss has got ADD? I mean, what are the signs that she's got ADD or he might have ADD? So there's a few telltale signs of at least traits of bosses with ADD. So in no particular order, the first is they are like an idea generating machine. I mean, every single meeting is full of ideas. I mean, chock full of ideas. And for clients that I've talked to and listeners who are listening to my show and readers who've written in, they've all shared the same story. They said, working for a boss with that kind of idea generation, it's so exciting. I mean, some of the best bosses I ever worked for in my career had that kind of excitement, because they would generate all these ideas and we would accomplish things that I never thought were even possible. So it's an amazing, as I've been told, a superpower, but also something that we need to make sure we're managing it properly, because it can also feel like it's just one idea after another, after another, after another. So if you've got a boss who's constantly bringing ideas and kind of going off the agenda to just bring more ideas, that's one possible trait. The second kind of common trait or attribute that I hear people tell me is they say that they'll have a tendency to forget things they've already agreed upon or decided upon. So it'll be 2 or 3 meetings down the road, and they'll bring up a topic that the team's looking at each other saying, we already covered that a couple of weeks ago, and the boss has kind of forgotten about it. So how do we manage that when they've kind of lost the thread along the way? So that's a second trait. A third trait is in our one-on-one meetings. If we don't give them a really tight agenda, they'll have a tendency to go one of two directions. Either really, really deep into the details. So I'll have leaders tell me, yeah, I we'll talk to my boss about kind of what the team's doing this quarter. And all of a sudden they're asking me about why I spent $30 on paper or a stapler last month. They'll go really, really into the details. Or they'll make a hard left turn. they'll start talking about a Netflix show they saw recently and how that could lead to a brand new business model for the team. Something completely kind of not even within the realm of what the team's been talking about. So if they go deep dives or hard lefts, that can be another trait. So those are all common ways that we can identify if our boss has got some of these tendencies. Now, if we notice some of these things and we see our boss doing some of these, there are some ways that we can start to focus them a little bit. So let me give you 3 good tips and strategies to help you focus a boss that might have some of these traits. So the first is we want to gently force prioritization. Okay, so I say gently because when a boss has ADD, part of what they love, or they have traits of ADD, part of what they love is they love that ability to be exciting and move in lots of directions. They don't like being reined in. So we want to kind of gently force some prioritization around them. So we might ask them, hey, I love all these ideas. Which are maybe the 3 to 5 that are most important to you? Or a really fun way I like to ask the question, kind of pull out the magic wand and say, hey, if you could wave the magic wand, well, there's maybe the 1 or 2 of these ideas that you would love to see get accomplished between now and our next meeting. So it's a more fun way to force them to prioritize. So you're kind of getting them to really narrow in on the things that they want to see that get done the most. The second thing we can do when we've got bosses that have some of these tendencies is we can start to bring in a little more focused agenda to our meetings with them. So rather than waiting on them to drive the agenda, if we do that, they're going to go deep dive or hard left. We might come in with more of a clearly stated agenda. So I often coach my clients. I'll say, actually, send them an agenda ahead of time. Make sure you send it pretty close to the meeting, not too many days before because they might forget about it. Send it pretty close to the meeting. Bullet points is always good. And if it's an in-person meeting, actually print it and hand it to them. Them holding it helps considerably. And if we want to go one step further, we want to add another level of color coding to the agenda to make it more interesting and really grab their attention. So let me step back and explain why that's so important. So for when we talk about bosses that have tendencies of ADD is an interesting thing. There's something really interesting and ironic about how you treat people with ADD. Historically, folks have been diagnosed, and remember, we're not diagnosing our boss today. We're just looking for tendencies and traits. But when folks have the clinical diagnosis, one of the common medications is Ritalin that is used to treat ADD. And Ritalin for individuals that don't have ADD is a stimulant. It's basically like speed. It will overstimulate us. But for someone with ADD, that stimulus actually helps us focus and calm down. It's a really interesting thing. I had a client several years ago, and this individual was not easily focused in one-on-one meetings, always doing other things and hard to kind of keep them really dialed into what was going on. And so they were doing multitasking regularly, and it was always seen as kind of rude and disrespectful. But as soon as they get up and do public speaking with all those faces looking at them, while it might make you or I get really nervous and uncomfortable, all that extra stimulus, focus them and calm them down. So when we're coming with agendas to our bosses, the more we can add interest to those agendas, the more we can add extra stimulus to those agendas, the better it will help them focus. So one of the best ways to do that is color code them and use something what I call a stoplight chart. Stoplight chart is a kind of a common project management tool. It's when essentially you take all the items that are occurring, you treat those as kind of rows on your sheet, and then next to each row, you color code it. And you put a green light and green color next to the ones that are on track, yellow next to the ones that we need to pay attention to, and then red next to the ones that are off track, that are emergencies that require a lot of conversation. It's a great way to kind of help focus our bosses on where they need to go and provide that extra stimulation. So that's another way that we can help kind of manage our bosses that have a little bit of ADD tendencies. And the last thing that we can do is provide them regular updates and reminders. So make sure that we're providing them status updates, regular updates on what we're working on, and some of those gentle reminders so they don't go into those meetings kind of wondering what this has already been decided or what's been occurred. And that prevents us from doing the same meeting over and over and over again. So those are all ways that we can help manage our bosses that have some of these ADD tendencies. Now, I want to turn a little bit to the other side of the coin. And now I want to speak to all of the folks listening right now that might have some ADD tendencies themselves. And sometimes it might just be because you notice about yourself. Other times it might be because you're in an industry that has a little more tendency to have some ADD rhythms. So some of our industries that operate a little ADD might be things like retail, healthcare, particularly emergency room healthcare, media, TV and movie production, anything that has a lot more of kind of reactive position and posture. Those industries tend to have a lot more of an ADD movement. So if we find ourselves in those, we might find ourselves loving to bring up ideas and loving to go lots of different directions and not liking to stay very focused down one path because it feels kind of boring. And while that's exciting for our teams, it can also be very frustrating for our teams. So I'll read to you a couple statements that I've gotten from team members when I've asked them. I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about what are some traits of a boss that might have ADD that would kind of help us identify that? And so if you've heard any of these traits before, or if you've heard any of these statements before, this is a way for you to kind of think to yourself, okay, maybe I've got some of these tendencies. So if you've ever had your teams tell you this, we love your great ideas, but it's hard to keep up with your pace and energy. Okay, that might be a sign. Sometimes we notice you'll bring up an idea that we've already discussed in a prior meeting and thought we'd resolved. We aren't sure if this is because you've forgotten the conversation or if you think it needs to be brought back to the forefront. That could be a sign. I or we are unclear of your priorities. It seems like the target's constantly changing. That could be a sign. And then, of course, the last one has to do with your one-on-ones. It's hard to predict what you might want to review in our one-on-ones. When I think you're going to want to discuss high-level progress, you dive into the details. Or if I prepare all the details, you might go in a different direction. So if you've heard any of these, which I referenced earlier, then that might be a sign that, you might have some of these tendencies. So if you find yourself nodding your head with any of those, these are some things you can do to make your team that much more effective this year and do some subtle tweaks to manage your style. So first, with anything, take ownership of this. So acknowledge, I've got some of these tendencies. And if you really want to double down on that, tell your team. Be honest with your team. Say, hey, team, I've noticed that I've gotten this feedback from you all, and I notice I have these tendencies, and I really want to work on it this year, and I need your help. So I think that's one of the first steps is acknowledging it, noticing it, and actually sharing it with your team. A second thing that you can do that will help your team is, and this is going to be hard. This is going to sound easy, but it's going to be hard. I want you to identify the 3 to 5 priorities that are most important for you. And you can say this month or this quarter or this year, but I want you to identify those 3 to 5 priorities. Now, I know that's hard because I know there's a lot of things that are really of interest to you and a lot of things you want to get accomplished. And narrowing it down to 3 to 5 is tricky, but trust me, that's going to help your team so incredibly much to know what are the 3 to 5. The number one complaint I hear from teams that if they could wave a magic wand and change anything about their leader that has some of these traits and tendencies is that they just don't know what the target is. It's constantly moving. So we want to give them those clear priorities so they can make progress so they're ready for another idea. So that would be our second tip for you is really trying to identify those 3 to 5 priorities and then communicate that to your team. Third, when you're going into your one-on-ones with your team members, just communicate to them your expectations for those meetings. Otherwise, they're going to guess wrong. And it's going to be frustrating for everybody. So tell them if you want them to send you an agenda ahead of time and they're going to prepare that's great. Or if you always want to talk about the details, and that's great. It doesn't matter what you choose. All that matters is you're consistent with whatever you pick. So here's the worst thing you can do. Tell them that, oh, no, you set the agenda and you just send it to me and we'll do whatever you say. And you tell them that. And as soon as they show up, you just grab a hold of the steering wheel and start talking about the last Netflix show you saw. You don't want to do that. So whatever you agree upon, it's just stick to it. And I know that's going to be hard, but that's going to be really, really important for you and your teams to really see that progress so that they see the progress. So they're ready for even more of your creativity and more of your passion and energy. We want to make sure we're giving them time to digest that and make progress so that you can continue to kind of fuel them in the direction you want to. And the last idea and tip I've got for you is a little more creative, but I found to be really, really effective. And that is to appoint someone on your staff as your informal chief of staff. And so the purpose of this person's role, in addition to doing their day-to-day job, is also to make sure they're going back with everyone else on the team and ensuring that people know what they're supposed to do, ensuring there's accountability, providing them reminders of what to do for the next meeting, and answering any questions they've got. So they're essentially doing a lot of that kind of accountability and follow-up stuff, while you can continue to kind of lead out front and create some of those ideas and that vision that you want, where you want to take the team. It also provides the team a great outlet and resource of someone they can talk to if they've got any specific questions for you, but maybe don't know how to approach you. They can approach this person, and this person can essentially be your translator. I find it to be a really, really effective way to complement a leader that's got all that passion and all that excitement and energy, to provide them with some kind of a good kind of operational right-hand person that can really help them kind of move the team forward and supplement all those strengths that an ADD leader typically brings. Today's show is really all about just tips and tricks for you to help you not only manage a leader that you might be supporting that has some of these ADD tendencies, or if you've got ADD tendencies, how do you supplement those and complement those in a way to help your team be that much more effective this year? So I'd love to get your thoughts. If there's any other additional either comments you've got or great ideas you found, not only in how to manage a leader with ADD, or you found to kind of manage yourself, please send them our way. We would love to hear those. That's how a lot of these ideas came from, where it was from listeners like you. And thank you for listening to the show today. If you haven't been rating and reviewing the show, please do. That's how we expand our listener base and expand our tribe and bring more people into the fold. And if you want more additional resources, of course, you can go to theworkplacetherapist.com, where there's past shows, additional articles, and of course, a link to my newest book, The Hot Sauce Principle: How to Live and Lead in a World Where Everything is Urgent All the Time. So until our next show, have a great week and an awesome life.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening to the show. In case you haven't heard, Brandon's got a new book out. He's going to tell you all about it.
Thanks, Emily. So the book is The Hot Sauce Principle: How to Live and Lead in a World Where Everything is Urgent All the Time. And if you're like me, and like most of us, everything does feel urgent all the time. It's like hot sauce is being poured on everything, whether it's our work life, our family life, coming from our clients, coming from our boss. And so the book is a practical guide on how do we manage urgency. Not only how do we set proper boundaries, but how do we properly create urgency when we need to. So I wrote the book for you. I can't wait for you to get a copy.
Thanks, Brandon. Don't forget to check out The Hot Sauce Principle, available now on Amazon.com. Back to the show.